In the final lesson for Unit 5, we're going to take a break from looking at strings, and we're going to go back to looking at numbers, and we're more specifically going to look at random numbers and how we can not only use them in our programs, but how we can make the exact set of random numbers that we want. So it says I can use random numbers in Python. So by the end of this lesson, that's what you'll be able to do. You'll be able to incorporate random numbers and the exact set that you want, regardless of what that set of random numbers is. So hopefully you already in the back of your mind know that random numbers are numbers that are randomly generated by a computer. Now, I put randomly in quotations here because I'm going to talk about how it's really not random when we use them in computer science or in Python specifically, but how it simulates random numbers. And these are used for games and simulations and for uncertain situations. So for example, if you flip a coin or you roll a dice or you're handed cards, like things happen randomly. And so that's when random numbers are used. You have to have an event that is seemingly random. Now, in Python, we have what are called pseudo-random numbers. So pseudo is a fancy word for false, just like pseudocode was false code. It was just code written with English. Pseudo-random numbers are really what we use in Python instead. And how it works is we start with a seed value. So seed values can be generated in a couple of different ways. Typically, it uses time on your computer to randomly, or not randomly, but to generate a seed number based on the hours, minutes, and seconds. And so that value is then fed into the random number function. And then from there, there's actually a string of numbers. And we go to that seed value, and then from there, all of the numbers appear to be random, but it's really just a string of numbers that are already pre-programmed. And so this seed value is just the starting value. And so all your numbers appear to be random because you start at different seeds all the time, which gives you a different sequence of those numbers because you're starting somewhere different. But if you were to feed that same seed value back into your computer, you would get the exact same string of random numbers after that. So they appear to be random. They're not truly random, but they're good enough for what we use them for in our class. So essentially, as I said, if you were to start this process over with the same seed, you'd get the same random row of numbers. So that's how pseudo-random numbers work. They appear to be random. They are not truly random because they simply generate a seed. Then, as I said, as that seed, how's that seed determined? It's typically on day, time. It can even go by minutes, seconds, those types of things. So that's why you get a different seed every single time the program itself is run. So just like previous programs that we've written, we have to import something in if we want to actually use random numbers in our program. So like math or the graphics, you would have to include one of these two or both of them, depending on how many different sets of random numbers you're creating, to the top of your program. So I'm going to do a file save as, okay? And then I'm going to go into my computer science projects and do Unit 5, Lesson 5, Lesson 5, not T, random numbers. So here I'm going to do Unit 5, Lesson 5, random numbers simulation. And then at the very top, I'm going to import in the random number vectors. So here we have from random import random. Then I'm going to have from random import rand. So we can add those into the very, very top of our program, and that will allow us to use these random functions as well as these random functions. There's actually two different sets of them. Okay, so as I said, there are three main functions for random. One of them uses the word random, and the other two use the word rand range. And we'll actually walk through and explain the differences between those. But these are what we need to have at the top of our program in order to actually use random numbers in our program. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type this code in. We're basically going to generate 20 random numbers using this random function. So notice I have that imported into the very top, and I have for I in range 20. So This is where you really have to remember how your loops run. Remember, this one loops 20 times from 0 to 19. It's going to loop through and run this code 20 times. Now, what I want it to do is I want it to generate a random number. So that's where I do random parentheses. So this is what I was talking about on this previous slide here. This is one of the random functions that we can use. But if we randomly generate a number, what we need to do is we need to save that number somewhere. So this is where I have num1 equals random, because what this is going to do is it's going to randomly generate a number in some way. We'll talk about what it specifically does in a second, and it's going to save it inside of num1. So it's going to save it inside of num1, and then we're going to print num1 to the screen, and every time this runs, it's going to randomly generate a new number, save it in num1, save it in num1, save it in num1. So that's what's randomly happening, or that's what's happening here, not randomly. We have a random number that's generated. We'll talk specifically about what types of random numbers that one generates in a second, and it prints the random number generated to the screen. So if we run this program, what you will see is I have numbers, well, it ran 0 through 19, so 20 numbers, and all of these numbers are less than 1, and it randomly generates a float number. And what the random function does is it randomly generates a float number between 0 and 1. Now, it can include and generate 0, but it will never generate 1. So what this random function does with the word random and 2 parentheses is it generates a random number between 0 and 1. 0 is included in that set of numbers, and 1 is not. So you can see all of these fall between 0 and 1. We didn't see 0 get generated, but there are a ton of numbers between 0 and all the way up to, but not quite equal to 1. So we have a lot of options there. That's okay that 0 was not generated. But that's that first random number generator that you will see. There's the first one. The second one here is called rand range. So this is where I imported the rand range set of functions because I wanted to use those as well. So this is type 1 with random. And then let's add type 2 into our program. So we do type 2 with rand range. And I'm actually just, so we can see the differences without having to see a million things generated, I'm going to comment that middle part out. Then here, we're going to do for I in range 20 again. So we're going to do 20 numbers, so loops 20 times. And then inside of there, I'm going to have num2, and this is where I'm going to do rand range, and I'm going to do 0, 6, just so we can see how it works when we put 2 numbers in here. So if we go back, you can see that this here takes in, the first version takes in 2 numbers. We're going to see what these 2 numbers tell the program to do. So here, we're going to generate a random number, and then here we're going to print that random number to the screen. If we run this, this is what we see. We see 20 numbers get generated. This time we only see integers, so that's telling us that rand range generates integers while random generates floats. And if we also look here, we see 4, 3, 2, 0, 5, 1. So what I notice here is 0 does pop up here. So I notice that 0 can be generated, and it's all of the integers between 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But none of them are 6. 6 isn't randomly generated. And so that's something really to note here is we're randomly generating a bunch of integers between 0 and 1 less than 6, which is 5. And that's how this first version of rand range works. We generate a random integer between the 2 integers, so 0 and 6. The first integer can be included in that set of numbers. The second integer is not included in that set of numbers. You can see here, here's another example. If we were to do 4, 10, and we did the same thing, if we ran it, it would do all the numbers from 4 up to 9, not quite 10. Or if we did this second set down here, we did 2, 2, again, same thing would kind of happen. We would start at -2 and go up to 1 less than 2, which is 1. So that's how the first version of rand range works. In the next video, we'll talk about how that next version of rand range works.